In St. Stanislaus, we have a long tradition. If you are a priest here, you have the feeling that you receive an inheritance. I feel small. When you see this church, you feel each brick, each piece of marble, each element of the church is filled with prayer and faith.
I'm a convert, and so for me, being Catholic is out of choice. You know, I went and I searched for it, as opposed to being born into it. St. Stanislaus is my second assignment, and it's become very personal.
I had been coming in and out of that church since I was born. We spoke a half a day of Polish and a half a day of English, and the Mass was said in Latin.
When we started going to the Latin Mass, there was a lot of the older people who had hung on to it for years and years and couldn't let go. Now it's majority is very young families.
Most of the residents of modern-day Milwaukee have never heard of Jones Island. It's now a small peninsula next to and under the landmark Hone Bridge, just south of downtown. Surrounded by industrial development, the smallest park in the county is the only reminder of a once thriving fishing community, settled by Polish, German, and Kashub immigrants. But it is here that the story of St. Stanislaus Parish begins.
The Kashubish people themselves came from the old country. My grandparents, of both sides, from my mother and from my dad, were both Kashubs. They probably came here about 1870, but Kashubs from Jones Island wanted a parish of their own.
The Kashubs and Poles had a great deal in common. They came from a seafaring Baltic region and had a similar language and customs. But what made them one was their shared Catholic faith.
The actual parish was founded in 1866. The original church was a old Lutheran church that they had purchased, and that was located at 5th and Mineral.
Since it was the first Polish Catholic church in America, they dedicated it to the patron saint of Poland, St. Stanislaus.
And as they busted at their seams, they felt the need that they had to build their own church. So the property was purchased at historic Mitchell and 5th Street.
Plans for a $40,000 edifice must have seemed daunting to fishermen making only 67 cents a day.
There wasn't a heck of a lot of money to be had at that time. The Kashubish people that belonged to St. Stanislaus Parish, the majority of them were seafaring people. They had their own tugs, they had their own fisheries, stuff like this. He supported the family at that time and the support of the church. They paid for it with their sweat and blood.
A cobbler named Anthony Kachanik kicked off the fundraising by selling his gold watch for $225. A loan with immigrant homes offered as collateral secured the rest.
The Polish immigrant who built this church didn't have big means. They were not very wealthy, but their wealth was their faith and their confidence in the providence of God.
The magnificent building we have today was completed in 1872. The immigrants and the babies kept coming in incredible numbers.
In my dad's side, there was 12 or 13 or 14, and I think there was 13, 14 on my mother's side. So when we had something doing, all we had to do was invite the immediate family, and we had a lot of people there.
In 1893, there were 500 baptisms, 200 confirmations, and 93 marriages.
If you didn't get here at least 15 minutes or 20 minutes ahead of time, you didn't get any place to sit down. Take 5 priests to hear confession on Friday. They had 2 in the back, of course, and they had 3 or 4 across in the communion rail in front.
So we think about the original founders, families that gave so much, but it wasn't just them, it's all through the years that we've seen that dedication. The school was built in the Depression. I don't know how they did that.
The schools established at St. Stan's were considered some of the best in the state.
I went to St. Stan's. I went to school with nuns. Well, you got a better education than you did in the public school. Yes, we did. Because those people put themselves out.
The parish was the center of life for the south side of Milwaukee for a century, with organizations, sports, and other activities meeting every day.
And I was married here in 1954. Those were big affairs. We had 300 people, 400 people for church. We had 300 people for breakfast after church. We had 300 people for supper. And then we had 500 for the reception at night.
Eventually, other churches grew off of St. Stanislaus just because the area was so heavily populated by Poles.
This was the founding parish of 20 other parishes in the Milwaukee diocese. I really feel that a lot of the people who built this parish deserve the title of sainthood because of what they've given to us.
The 1960s brought changes in the Catholic Church.
The church was changing. There were things that were being done that weren't done before. So what a certain group of people think is right is not necessarily right 30 years later, 40 years later.
This prestigious Polish parish was on the wane. It was a time of decline.
Besides, all the changes that were occurring in society in the 60s, the church too was also going through change. The demographics of the neighborhood of south side of Milwaukee were also changing, and the installation of the expressway out in front of the church all had a major impact on St. Stanislaus. And unfortunately, it caused a decline in the membership of St. Stan's.
To make the building more maintenance-free and to accommodate the new thinking of the era, traditional Catholic imagery was de-emphasized.
Everything was painted one color beige. The original stained glass windows, instead of taking them out and restoring them, they just replaced them. Most of them were all destroyed, unfortunately, in the removal process.
There were, women from the Polish community outside, saying their rosary and weeping over the destruction of something so beautiful.
A fire that started near the Sacred Heart altar slowed, but did not stop, the process of modernizing the church.
It went from 600 families, down to 40, 30, 40, and then some more.
By the 1980s, there were so few families coming to Mass that both the grade school and high school were closed. The diocese considered shuttering St. Stan's altogether.
It was hit and run there for a long time with the church going to stay in existence.
In 2007, Pope Benedict XVI declared that the traditional Latin Mass had never been abolished. It was the same year Milwaukee's Latin Mass community was looking for a new home and a new priest.
There was a small committee of people that was formed to attempt to find a parish that would work well with the Latin Mass, because many don't.
Archbishop Dolan saw the need to establish a Latin Mass, and no better way to do it than to bring the Institute of Christ the King and put him at St. Stanislaus, because St. Stanislaus was in danger of being closed.
So the two kind of providentially came together.
The Institute of Christ the King is an international priestly order dedicated to saying the Old Mass.
I have yet to meet anyone in the Institute who isn't just on fire for their faith and full of joy, just such joy. We've been just so blessed to have them here.
The first priest that was here at St. Stanislaus was Canon Manet.
He was a beautiful fit. He was so enthusiastic. So he was a great foundation for the parish. And every week we see new people. Every week there are new young families.
It's a rebirth. It's a rebirth of an old tradition. They try to keep it as close as possible to the old ways and the old things that were done.
St. Stanislaus now had some financial help to deal with long overdue repairs.
When Canon Manet arrived, there was so much that needed to be done. And one of the first things that he did was to just improve the condition of the rectory.
It was slowly deteriorating. And if it wouldn't have been for their financial backing, the church might still be here, but I don't think it would be a practicing parish.
The restoration kicked into high gear when the Institute assigned Canon Benoit Jair and Abbe George Baird to the church.
Canon Jair and Abbe George are kind of a 1-2 punch. I think Canon Jair is a man of great vision. He could see the aesthetics of it, he could see the beauty of the rest of the building and bring that here. And Abbe George is the one who could take the sledgehammer and knock down the walls and make sure it got done properly. And they just work so beautifully together. It's inspiring, and they get along so well. You can tell they're brothers in the faith. They love each other. It's a really great relationship.
Before restoring the aesthetic elements of the church, structural issues had to be handled.
I would say that the first step was things which are unfortunately expensive but not very visible, like repairs on the roof, heating, air conditioning, electricity.
The need to rebuild the front steps of the church, the tuck pointing around the mosaic of Our Lady of Czestochowa. Also, the significant water damage had occurred into the interior of the rectory. After we addressed the significant concerns as far as the mechanical and the structural needs of the church, then we actually started doing some beautification of the interior of the church. We started with the narthex of the church, so we wanted to get an immediate impact and improve the quality of the appearance at the entrance to the church.
Now it's totally different because we are working on things which are much more motivating, and the transformation is much more visible. So parishioners are very enthusiastic and they are a little bit thrilled.
We had to remove all the carpeting. It was kind of like a purple colored carpeting that went throughout the entire church. And that was put in the 1960s.
We have chosen to put porcelain tiles because it's not too heavy. And also because this color imitates the color of stone.
The porcelain tile also improved the acoustics of the church. We were blessed that we had a really good architect who studied in Italy, and the pattern that he designed, it's very beautiful in the sense that it all ties together into the actual nave of the church. There's a beautiful fleur-de-lis pattern.
First of all, the fleur-de-lis are not my idea. They are the idea of the architect. He brought this idea, and because I am French, it was impossible to say no.
The original baptismal font, in the 60s they decided to move it into one of the back sacristies, but it wasn't liturgically correct because liturgically, and where baptisms occur are usually outside of the main church or in the rear of the church. And then as you're baptized, you're brought into the church in the welcoming. So that's why we decided to move the baptismal font to the back of the church.
After the font had been moved from the sacristy, the work continued there.
Yes, I remember we were working in the sacristy because Abbe George told me, now we have to prepare the floor, and suddenly I heard his loud voice calling me, and I told him, did you find a treasure? He said, yes, there is a treasure underneath the step.
The original intricate parquet floors were well preserved after a half-century under boards and carpet. The sacristy was revitalized. But the biggest task yet was just getting underway right across the threshold.
The high altar, during the 60s, what they decided to do was to fill the sanctuary with concrete. And the only way to restore the high altar was to bring the level of the sanctuary back to the original level. And that meant removing 14 inches of concrete throughout the entire sanctuary. Large machines were brought in to cut the concrete into slabs, and then it was manually hauled out.
We have removed 25 tons of concrete in the sanctuary of the church.
And we put in a new porcelain tile floor throughout the sanctuary. Then the high altar was restored to back how it was, including the two side altars.
The high altar is spectacular. It is so stunningly beautiful, and I love to bring people in and just let them drink it in.
With the change of the liturgy in the 60s, there was a beautiful communion rail. Unfortunately, most of that was removed.
Our first idea was to restore a communion rail exactly as it was 50 years ago. But our means are small.
The original discussion was this will be wood, it will be made to look like marble. We cannot afford marble, it would just be prohibitive. Then Canon Jair, in one of his adventures in France or in Italy, discovered this could be done, and we were overjoyed.
The marble is white Carrara marble with green onyx columns, and the green onyx comes from Pakistan. It was manufactured in Italy and crated and sent on a boat, and it was delivered here to Milwaukee.
Like, you know, when we were child, we had you remember, Lego. So the communion rail was assembled here like a Lego game. So it's nice to have it again after 50 years of a too long absence.
It's just beautiful, and to know God designed that in the earth, and we can use it to give Him glory.
The original colors of the sanctuary, you know, the figures, the statuary had facial colors, you know, all the clothing had different colors. So the sanctuary was much more beautiful. In the 60s, everything was painted, it was like a one color.
First, the scaffolding was erected, and that allowed us to get closer up to the ceiling.
Sunday of the first communions, we had this huge, ugly scaffolding. We knew that we would have to scratch 15 layers of paint.
We created a sample, and that allowed us to fine-tune the design, and then we recreated the stenciling, the polychroming on all the moldings and the lunettes and the rood beam and gilding and so forth that really embellishes the architecture.
The painting that has been done throughout the sanctuary, throughout the nave as well, really does bring the church back to the original beauty.
In the sanctuary, probably the most prominent, you know, statues that you see is there's the large beam that goes from one side of the sanctuary to the other. And the story behind that was that in 1893 there was a large storm on Lake Michigan.
Snow was, ice was on the lake, and the wind shifted around, and it blew the ice around the tugs. It would have crushed the tugs, because they were all wooden hulls at that time. And they all prayed to God, and miraculous, whatever you want to call it, the wind shifted around and blew the ice away from the impact tugs. So in appreciation for what God helped them, they in turn put the crucifix across above the altar from the people of Jones Island.
The rood beam of a sailing vessel was placed connecting the two walls of the sanctuary together. On that beam, there's the four symbols of the four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Also, there's a statue of the Blessed Mother and also of St. John. So all those statues, including the crucifix, was all repainted. It really turned out really nice. It went from just a one color beige to now this vibrant, it jumps out at you now. And so it's really a beautiful improvement to the sanctuary. It was all painted how it was back in 1872, working off of old photographs.
I remember when we started to work on the restoration of this church, our architect was here and he told me, you will have to find stained glass windows fitting with the style of the church. And I said to myself, this man is crazy. Maybe he doesn't know what is money. Everyone said that the former stained glass windows were totally destroyed and smashed. But we received this phone call, a man who didn't know that we were in the process of restoration of the church called us and he said, I have your stained glass windows in my basement. I remember I took the phone, I didn't believe my ears.
So we went over to his house and indeed he had quite a bit of the stained glass, maybe 5% of all the stained glass.
I said to myself, the architect was right. He was more confident than me in divine providence. We have to do it.
Although only a small portion of the glass was usable, it gave the craftsmen exactly what they needed.
Discovery of the stained glass was instrumental in allowing us to first understand what the design was there, some of the themes, and then also the colors of the glass.
We started with the sanctuary. We chose the two stained glass windows were the Immaculate Conception and of course St. Stanislaus because of the church.
In the Middle Ages, people started to put stained glass windows in churches so that they could see and be inspired by what they were looking at. It would tell them a story of a saint or of a blessed person or the Blessed Mother and help elevate their minds to that story and that person. And that's what we're trying to restore.
The original stained glass windows were traditional stained glass. And during the 60s, they were replaced with a very modern type of window, inch-thick stained glass held together with a larger cement mortar mix. It's a design flaw that about each panel, 50% of the light is lost because this heavy cement to hold that glass in place. So therefore it makes the church very dark. But by putting in the typical traditional type of stained glass, it already has made the church much more brighter, especially in the sanctuary. It's very visible. We're developing a plan for the long-term replacement of all the stained glass in the church. The windows are very large and of course they're very costly, but with time and with dedication, it's nothing that's out of our reach.
The parish is constantly active. We have boys groups, we have girls groups, we have teen groups, we have several different adult groups. And it's just a real sense of family and future. This is our time in history where we can make our mark in a way that hopefully mimics the humility and generosity and faith of the forebears that have been here.
Well, maybe God was looking out for St. Stan's. He said, he came the hard way and there's no reason why it should vanish. I think our ancestors are happy looking down and saying, we're the ones that showed them the right way. They have a great group of people I think is going to ensure the parish for a long time to come.
This work of restoration now is not our work, is not our success. We are only a small and humble link in a long chain. And I think that the parishioners here, they understand that very well. We didn't choose St. Stanislaus. I would say that St. Stanislaus chose us.
St. Stanislaus is the oldest Polish parish in North America. Granted, there's been some difficulties through the changing of demographics, the building of an expressway, changes in liturgy in the church and society, and it just keeps thundering right on ahead. And you know what, if we've gone 150 years, you know what, I'm sure there's 150 more ahead of us.